San Francisco's Mission District pulsed with life under the neon haze of a late summer night in 2018. The air was thick with the scent of street tacos, spilled beer, and the faint hum of ambition that clung to the city like fog. Daniel Caldwell sat hunched over a glass of bourbon at the edge of a crowded bar called the Rusty Bolt, his pale skin catching the dim amber glow of the overhead lights. His sharp jawline and tousled dark hair marked him as someone who belonged in Silicon Valley's elite circles. But tonight, his blue eyes were clouded with betrayal. His business partner, Victor Lane, a white American with a slick charm and a knack for manipulation, had just gutted their startup Quantum Dynamics by selling proprietary code to a rival firm. Daniel's dream, his life's work, was unraveling, and the bourbon was his only anchor. Across the bar, Gianna Torres leaned against a graffiti-covered wall, her deep brown skin radiant under the flickering lights, an African-American artist with a fire in her eyes. She was nursing a cheap vodka soda, her paint-splattered jeans and cropped leather jacket, a stark contrast to the tech bros crowding the room. Her curly hair was pulled into a loose bun, strands escaping to frame her face, as she sketched absent-mindedly on a napkin. Gianna was 28, scraping by on freelance gigs, her dreams of a breakthrough in the art world dimming with every unpaid bill. But her presence had a spark, a quiet defiance that drew eyes, including Daniel's. Their meeting wasn't planned. It was a collision. 3 drinks deep, Daniel caught sight of Gianna's sketch, a chaotic swirl of lines that somehow formed a circuit board blooming into a flower. He stumbled over less graceful than he'd intended and pointed at the napkin. "That's incredible. You make tech look alive." Gianna raised an eyebrow, her lips curving into a half smile. "Tech's already alive. It's just got no soul." Her voice was low teasing, but there was an edge to it, like she'd seen too many dreams crushed to trust flattery. Daniel laughed, a sound he hadn't heard from himself in weeks. "You're not wrong. I'm Daniel, by the way. Daniel Caldwell." He extended a hand, his pale fingers steady despite the bourbon. "Gianna Torres." She shook his hand, her grip firm, her dark eyes scanning him like she was reading code. "You don't look like you belong here." "Neither do you," he shot back, and the air between them crackled. What followed was a conversation that burned through the noise of the bar. They talked about art tech, the way Silicon Valley chewed up dreamers and spat out cynics. Daniel, raw from Victor's betrayal, poured out his story, how he'd built Quantum Dynamics from a dorm room idea to a company on the cusp of revolutionizing quantum computing, only to have Victor sell their core algorithm for a quick payout. Gianna listened, her gaze steady, and shared her struggles, galleries that dismissed her work as too urban, clients who paid late or not at all. They were strangers, but the weight of their failures forged a connection neither expected. The night blurred. Drinks multiplied. Laughter turned to whispers, then to touches, a brush of fingers, a hand lingering on a wrist. By 2 a.m., they were stumbling out of the bar, the city's pulse matching theirs. Gianna's apartment was closer, a tiny studio in the Tenderloin, with paint cans stacked in corners and canvases leaning against walls. The space smelled of turpentine and possibility. Neither questioned what came next. Clothes hit the floor, and the world outside dissolved into a haze of need and release. Daniel's pale skin pressed against Gianna's rich brown, their bodies a study in contrast, moving with a rhythm that felt like it could rewrite the stars. But dawn brought a fracture. Daniel's phone buzzed at 5 a.m., a number he didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was clipped, urgent, claiming to be Victor's assistant. "There's a crisis at Quantum Dynamics. You need to come now." Daniel, groggy and hungover, didn't question it. He scribbled a note for Gianna. "I'm sorry, but I had to run. Call me 415-555-3927, and slipped out, his heart pounding with regret and adrenaline. He didn't know the call was a lie, a ploy orchestrated by Victor to keep Daniel distracted while he finalized the sale of their tech. He didn't realize Gianna would wake to an empty bed, his note crumpled under her pillow, her heart bruised by his absence. Gianna stirred hours later, the sunlight harshly coming through her cracked window. The bed was cold, and Daniel was gone. She found the note, read it, and crumpled it again, her jaw tight. Another man who made promises in the dark and vanished in the light. She wasn't surprised, but it stung. She pushed the pain down, focusing on the day ahead, another gig, another hustle. But as weeks passed, nausea crept in. A drugstore test confirmed her fear she was pregnant. Gianna sat on her bathroom floor, the stick trembling in her hand, and made a choice. She'd do this alone. She didn't need Daniel Caldwell, whoever he was. Across town, Daniel stood in the ruins of quantum dynamics. Victor's betrayal was complete. The code sold, the company gutted. But Daniel wasn't done. He'd rebuild brick by brick, even if it took years. Yet as he threw himself into the fight, a piece of him lingered on that night with Gianna. Her laugh, her fire, how she'd made him feel alive when everything else was falling apart. He didn't know where she was, didn't have her number, and the bar had no record of her. She was a ghost, a memory that haunted him as he clawed back to the top. The night that changed everything, left them both scarred, bound by a moment neither could forget, and a secret neither knew. Gianna carried twins she'd raise alone. Daniel was hungry for redemption, unaware of the family he'd left behind. With its glittering promises and shadowed betrayals, Silicon Valley watched them both, waiting for their paths to collide again. 7 years had passed since that electric night in San Francisco, and the city had changed as much as Daniel Caldwell and Gianna Torres. Silicon Valley thrummed with new giant scandals and the same relentless hunger for power. Daniel stood at the helm of Caldwell Quantum, a phoenix risen from the ashes of his old startup. The company's sleek office in Palo Alto gleamed with glass and steel, a monument to his grit. At 35, he was a name whispered in boardrooms, his quantum computing breakthroughs drawing eyes from Wall Street to Beijing. But success hadn't erased the hollow ache that lingered from a particular night in 2018, a memory of a woman whose fire had briefly lit his world. Gianna, meanwhile, had carved her own path. Her Tenderloin studio was long gone, replaced by a modest apartment in Oakland, where she raised her twins Aiden and Lucas. The boys, now 6, were a whirlwind of energy, their laughter filling the space where loneliness might have settled. Gianna had transformed her hustle into a thriving freelance design career, her work gracing tech startups and art galleries. Her style, bold, intricate blending digital precision with raw emotion, had earned her a reputation. Yet every late-night project, every client call, was fueled by a fierce resolve to give her sons a life she'd never had. She didn't think of Daniel often, but when she did, it was with a mix of anger and something softer, something she refused to name. Daniel's days were a blur of meetings, code, and ambition. Caldwell Quantum was on the cusp of an IPO, a move that would cement his place among Silicon Valley's elite. He wore tailored suits, now his boyish charm hardened into a quiet intensity. But late at night in his minimalist condo overlooking the bay, he'd pour a bourbon and let his mind drift to Gianna. He'd tried to find her once years ago, but the trail went cold. No social media, no trace. He wondered if she'd forgotten him, if that night had meant as much to her as it still did to him. The guilt of leaving without a proper goodbye gnawed at him, a rare crack in his controlled exterior. Gianna's life revolved around her boys. The dreamer Aiden loved sketching spaceships and coding simple games on an old laptop Gianna had refurbished. Lucas the firecracker was always building something: cardboard forts, Lego cities, or trouble. They were her anchor, Her reason for pushing through late-night deadlines and clients who didn't get her vision. She'd built a network, a community of artists and coders who respected her talent. But the weight of being a single mother never lifted. She'd lie awake sometimes wondering about the man who'd left a note and nothing else. She'd thrown it away, but the number 415-555-3927 was burned into her memory. She'd never called it. Caldwell Quantum's rise wasn't without shadows. Victor Lane, who'd betrayed Daniel years ago, had wormed back into the tech world. Now a venture capitalist sitting on Caldwell Quantum's board, Victor played the part of reformed ally. But Daniel didn't trust him. Their meetings were a chess game, every word calculated. Victor's smile was too sharp, his questions too probing. Daniel knew he was biding his time, waiting for a misstep. Daniel didn't know that Victor had never forgotten the night he'd orchestrated Daniel's disappearance from Gianna's life, a petty act of control that had spiraled into something bigger. Gianna's latest project was a lifeline, a high-profile contract to design branding for a tech firm's IPO. The pay was enough to cover a year's rent, maybe even a vacation for the boys. She threw herself into the work, sketching logos that fused quantum patterns with human warmth. The client, a company called Caldwell Quantum, was vague about their expectations, but Gianna didn't care. She'd deliver something unforgettable. She didn't know the CEO was Daniel, and didn't realize their worlds were about to collide. Daniel, meanwhile, was drowning in the IPO's demands. Investors wanted assurances. Regulators wanted compliance. And the press wanted a story. He was good at giving them what they wanted. Control, confidence, a vision of the future. But the memory of Gianna lingered like a bug in his code, impossible to debug. He'd see her in flashes, a woman's laugh in a coffee shop, a sketch in a portfolio that felt like hers. He told himself it was irrational that she was gone, but his heart didn't listen. Gianna's days were a balancing act. Mornings meant getting Aiden and Lucas to school. Afternoons meant client calls, and nights meant designing until her eyes burned. The boys kept her grounded. Aiden would show her his latest game, a clunky space shooter that made her heart swell. Lucas would drag her to the park, demanding she time his sprints. She'd laugh, hiding her exhaustion, and wonder how she'd gotten so lucky and tired simultaneously. The Caldwell Quantum job was her chance to break through and prove she was more than a hustler. She didn't know it would bring her face to face with the man who'd changed her life and left her to pick up the pieces. As the IPO loomed, Daniel felt the pressure mounting. Victor's presence was constantly irritating, his suggestions laced with veiled threats. Daniel's team was stretched thin, and the quantum algorithms they'd built were pushed to their limits. He needed a win, something to rally the board and the investors. The branding project was a small puzzle, but it mattered. His heart stopped when he saw the designer's name, Gianna Torres, on the contract. It couldn't be her. Could it? Oblivious to the storm brewing, Gianna poured her soul into the logo. She wanted it to scream innovation, but feel human, a balance she'd mastered in her work. She emailed her initial concepts to Caldwell Quantum, her fingers trembling as she hit send. She didn't know she was sending them to Daniel, didn't know he'd open the file and feel the world tilt. The designs were unmistakably hers, bold, alive, like the sketch on that napkin 7 years ago. He stared at the screen, his bourbon forgotten, and knew he had to see her again. Their paths were converging, pulled by fate or chance, or the cruel gravity of Silicon Valley. The night's aftermath had shaped them both. But the truth of the twins, of Victor's betrayal, of the love that never quite died, was still buried, waiting to surface. The Palo Alto office of Caldwell Quantum buzzed with the frenetic energy of a company on the verge of an IPO. Glass walls reflected the late afternoon sun, casting sharp angles across polished floors. Daniel Caldwell stood at the head of a conference table, his tailored suit crisp, his voice steady, as he briefed his team on the latest investor pitch. But his mind was elsewhere, tethered to a name he hadn't seen in 7 years. Gianna Torres. Her design portfolio had landed in his inbox 2 days ago, and he'd been unraveling since then. The sketches vibrant, precise, alive with the same fire he'd seen on a napkin in a San Francisco bar, were unmistakably hers. He'd approved her contract without hesitation, but now as the first meeting loomed, his pulse raced. Gianna stepped off the BART train in Palo Alto, her portfolio bag slung over her shoulder. She'd dressed carefully, black blazer, white blouse, and jeans that were creative but professional. Her curly hair was tamed into a low bun, though a few strands rebelled in the warm September breeze. The Caldwell Quantum job was her biggest yet, a chance to cement her reputation as a freelance designer. She didn't know the CEO was Daniel, and she didn't know her past was waiting to ambush her. All she knew was the client wanted a logo that screamed innovation, and she was ready to deliver. The office was a cathedral of glass and ambition. Gianna checked in at the reception desk, her nerves humming. The receptionist, a young woman with a headset and a practiced smile, led her to a conference room on the top floor. Gianna's eyes darted to the view Silicon Valley sprawling below a grid of dreams and dollar signs. She set up her laptop, pulling up her latest concepts, a quantum wave pattern that morphed into a human silhouette, bold yet approachable. She was ready, or so she thought. Daniel paused outside the conference room, his hand on the door. He'd rehearsed this moment 100 times since seeing her name. Would she recognize him? Would she hate him? He pushed the door open, and there she was, Gianna standing by the table, her presence as electric as it had been 7 years ago. Her eyes flicked up, and for a split second, the world froze. Daniel's heart thudded. She was real, not a ghost, not a memory. But her expression was neutral, professional, no hint of recognition. Did she not remember him? Ms. Torres? He said, his voice steady despite the storm inside. I'm Daniel Caldwell, CEO of Caldwell Quantum. Thanks for coming. Gianna's smile was polite, but her eyes narrowed slightly. A flicker of something confusion, maybe crossing her face. Pleasure to meet you, she said, shaking his hand. Her grip was firm, familiar, sending a jolt through him. She didn't know he was the CEO. She didn't think he was him. The realization hit Daniel like a punch. 7 years and she'd moved on, maybe erased him. The meeting began a dance of professionalism. Gianna presented her designs, her voice confident as she walked the team through her vision logos that wove quantum mechanics with human connection. Daniel watched her half listening, half lost in the past. Her gestures, the way she tilted her head when explaining a concept, were the same. But there was a new strength to her, a steel forged by years he hadn't been part of. He wanted to ask her everything, where she'd been, what her life was now. But the room was full of his team, and Victor Lane sat at the far end, his sharp eyes watching. Victor, now a board member, hadn't changed. His slick charm and calculated smiles still masked a predator's instinct. He leaned forward, interrupting Gianna's presentation with a question about scalability, his tone shy of condescending. Gianna didn't flinch. She said the design system is modular and clicked on a slide outlining her approach. It scales across platforms without losing coherence. Victor nodded, but his gaze lingered on her, then flicked to Daniel, a glint of suspicion in his eyes. The meeting ended with applause for Gianna's work. Daniel lingered as the team filed out, his mind racing. Ms. Torres, could we discuss a few details? He asked, gesturing to the table. She nodded, packing her laptop but staying put. Victor shot Daniel a look before leaving a silent warning. Daniel ignored it. Alone, the air thickened. Gianna sat across from him, her expression guarded. Your designs are exceptional, Daniel said, searching for an opening. They remind me of something I saw in a San Francisco bar years ago. Gianna's fingers froze on her laptop case. Her eyes met his, and there was the spark of recognition. The rusty bolt, she said softly, almost to herself. "You're Daniel." He knotted his throat tight. "I didn't know if you'd remember." Her laugh was sharp-edged with disbelief. "Remember, you left a note and disappeared." She stood, her movements quick, defensive. "What is this? Some game?" "No," Daniel said, rising too. "I didn't mean to leave like that. There was a call about a crisis at my company. I thought—" He stopped, realizing how hollow it sounded. "I tried to find you after, but you were gone." Gianna's jaw tightened. "I wasn't gone. I was right there in the same city, surviving." She slung her bag over her shoulder. "I have to go. I'll send the revised designs by Monday." "Gianna, wait." But she was already at the door, her steps brisk. Daniel watched her go, his chest aching. She remembered him, and she was angry. But there was something else in her eyes, something that mirrored the pull he felt. Chemistry, undeniable, even after all these years. Gianna's heart pounded as she rode the elevator down. Daniel Caldwell, CEO of Caldwell Quantum. The man who'd left her bed at dawn and left her with twins she'd raised alone. She hadn't recognized him at first, his polished suit and CEO aura, but his voice and eyes had betrayed him. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but she had a job to do, a life to protect. Aiden and Lucas were waiting at home, and she wouldn't let Daniel's reappearance upend everything. Back in his office, Daniel stared at the valley, his mind a tangle of regret and hope. Gianna was here in his world again. He didn't know about the twins, didn't know the truth she carried. But he knew one thing: he wasn't letting her slip away again. Not without a fight. The days that followed were a tightrope. Gianna threw herself into the Caldwell Quantum project, refining her designs with a precision that bordered on obsession. She worked late, and her Oakland apartment was quiet, except for the hum of her laptop and the occasional giggle from Aiden and Lucas down the hall. She told herself it was just a job, that Daniel was just a client. But every email she sent him, every revision, marked with his feedback, felt like a conversation, a thread pulling them closer. Daniel, meanwhile, was drowning in IPO prep, meetings with investors, stress tests on their quantum algorithms, and Victor's constant prodding left him frayed. But Gianna's designs were a bright spot. Her work was brilliant, but it was more than that. It was a window into her, a reminder of the night they'd shared. He started finding excuses to email her request, minor tweaks, and keep her in his orbit. Each interaction was a spark, reigniting something he'd thought was lost. Their second meeting was at a coffee shop in Menlo Park, neutral ground. Gianna arrived first, her laptop open, her guard up. Daniel walked in no suit this time, just a navy sweater and jeans, his attempt to seem less like a CEO and more like the man she'd met years ago. They talked business at first, and her design spread across the table. But the conversation drifted inevitably to the past. "Why didn't you call Daniel?" asked his voice low. "Careful. I left my number." Gianna's eyes flashed. "You left. I wasn't chasing someone who couldn't stay." She sipped her coffee, her hands steady, but her heart racing. "What do you want Daniel to relive, some one-night stand?" "No," he said, leaning forward. "I want to know you, the real you, not just the designer. I've thought about you for years." Her laugh was bitter. "You don't know me. You don't know my life." She stood ready to leave, but his hand grazed hers, a fleeting touch that stopped her. "Then let me," he said. "Let me try." Gianna pulled her hand away, but she didn't walk out. Something in his voice, his eyes held her. The same pull from 7 years ago. The same reckless spark. She sat back down, her resolve wavering. They talked for hours, the coffee growing cold, the past and present blurring. She didn't tell him about the twins, didn't tell him the truth. But she felt it, the chemistry, the danger of letting him in again. Victor, watching from the sidelines, noticed the shift. He saw Daniel's distraction, the way he lit up when Gianna's name came up. Victor didn't know their history, but knew leverage when he saw it. He started digging quietly into Gianna's life. The IPO was too close, the stakes too high for him to let Daniel's focus slip. Silicon Valley was a game of power, and Victor played to win. The reunion was only the beginning. Daniel and Gianna circled each other, drawn by a force neither could deny. But the truth about the twins, about Victor's schemes, loomed like a shadow ready to pull them under. The Caldwell Quantum office was a pressure cooker, and the IPO is now weeks away. Daniel navigated board meetings, investor calls, and late-night coding sessions, but his thoughts drifted to Gianna. Their coffee shop meeting had cracked something open, a fragile bridge between past and present. Her designs were now the centerpiece of the IPO, branding her logo plastered across pitch decks and investor packets. But it wasn't just her work that haunted him. It was her laugh, her guarded smiles, the way she challenged him without flinching. He wanted more than a professional partnership, but every step toward her felt like crossing a minefield. Gianna was equally conflicted. Her Oakland apartment, cluttered with toys and sketchpads, was her sanctuary, but Daniel's reappearance had shaken its walls. She'd catch herself staring at her laptop. His emails open, his words professional, but laced with something warmer. She told herself to keep it business, protect her life sons and independence. Aiden and Lucas were her world, their drawings pinned to the fridge, their bedtime stories, a nightly ritual. But Daniel's presence stirred memories she'd buried, and the chemistry between them was a live wire, dangerous and undeniable. Their third meeting was at Caldwell Quantum's office, a late-night session to finalize the branding. The building was quiet, most employees were gone, and the city lights glittered through the glass walls. Gianna spread her final designs across the conference table, her voice steady as she explained her tweaks: a sharper color palette, a sleeker font. Daniel listened, but his eyes drifted to her, catching the way her fingers moved and her brow furrowed when she was deep in thought. He wanted to reach out to close the distance, but her walls were up, and he didn't know how to scale them. "You've outdone yourself," he said, leaning back in his chair. "This is going to make the IPO unforgettable." Gianna nodded, a small smile breaking through. "That's the goal." She hesitated, then added, "You're not what I expected. A CEO, I mean. You're grounded." He laughed, the sound soft in the quiet room. "Don't let the suit fool you. I'm still the guy who got drunk at the Rusty Bolt and rambled about quantum computing." Her smile faded, her eyes searching his. "That guy left without a goodbye." Daniel's chest tightened. "I know. And I've regretted it every day since." He leaned forward, his voice low. "Gianna, I'm not that guy anymore. Let me prove it." She didn't respond, but she didn't look away either. The silence stretched heavy with possibility. Then her phone buzzed, a text from her sitter, reminding her to get home to the boys. She stood, breaking the moment. "I need to go. I'll email the final files tonight." Daniel watched her leave, frustration and longing warring inside him. He didn't know about Aiden, and Lucas didn't know the secret she carried. But he felt the weight of it, the unspoken barrier between them. Victor Lane was a shadow moving through Caldwell Quantum's orbit, his influence subtle but toxic. As a board member, he had access to every decision, every weakness. He'd noticed Daniel's preoccupation with Gianna, the way meetings paused when her name came up. Victor didn't know their history, but he sensed an opportunity. He started digging deeper, hiring a private investigator to investigate Gianna's life. The report returned with photos: Gianna at a park with two boys, their faces strikingly familiar. Victor's mind raced. He didn't have the whole picture, but had enough to start pulling strings. At a board meeting, Victor played his first card. "The branding is strong," he said, his voice smooth, as he flipped through Gianna's designs. "But are we sure about this freelancer? No offense, Daniel, but we don't know her. A project this big needs someone vetted." Daniel's jaw clenched. "She's vetted. Her work speaks for itself." Victor smiled, all teeth. "Of course. Just looking out for the company." His eyes flicked to Gianna's portfolio, lingering on her name. He was planting seeds, testing reactions. Daniel's defensiveness was a tell, and Victor filed it away. Unaware of Victor's scheming, Gianna was grappling with her doubts. She wanted to trust Daniel to believe he was more than the man who'd left her. But trust meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant risking the life she'd built. Aiden and Lucas were her priority, and letting Daniel in could upend everything. Yet every meeting, every glance chipped away at her resolve. She felt the pull, the same reckless spark from 7 years ago. It scared her as much as it thrilled her. Their subsequent encounter was unplanned. Gianna was at a tech conference in San Francisco, showcasing her designs at a freelance booth. Daniel was the keynote speaker and was present to command the room. Their eyes met across the crowd, and he approached her, ignoring the investors vying for his attention. He said he didn't expect to see you here. His smile genuine. "Same." Gianna replied, her tone lighter than she intended. "Big speech today." "Big speech, bigger pressure," he said, loosening his tie. "Your booth's stealing the show, though." She laughed, and for a moment they were just Daniel and Gianna, not CEO and freelancer. They wandered the conference floor, discussing design trends, tech's obsession with minimalism, and the absurdity of Silicon Valley's buzzwords. It felt easy, natural, like slipping back into that night at the Rusty Bolt. But when his hand brushed hers, she pulled back the weight of her secret, her boys anchoring her. Victor was at the conference too, watching from a distance. He saw how Daniel leaned toward Gianna and how she smiled despite herself. He didn't know about the twins, but he knew Daniel was distracted, and distraction was a weakness. He approached later, all charm, introducing himself to Gianna as a board member. "Impressive work," he said, his eyes cold despite the smile. "We're lucky to have you." Gianna nodded, uneasy. There was something off about Victor, something predatory. She excused herself, but his gaze followed her, calculating. Daniel's need to control was his strength and his flaw. He'd built Caldwell Quantum from nothing, micromanaging every detail to ensure success. But with Gianna, control slipped. He wanted to know her to fix the past, but her wariness frustrated him. He started pushing more meetings, emails, and excuses to see her. It wasn't just attraction. It was a need to understand why she held back, why her eyes flickered with something unspoken. Gianna felt the pressure. Daniel's intensity was magnetic, but reminded her why she'd built her walls. She'd fought for her independence, for her sons, and letting him in risked losing that. Yet she couldn't deny the spark, the way his presence made her feel alive. She started to waver, agreeing to another meeting, then a dinner to discuss the project. Each step pulled her closer to a line she wasn't sure she could cross. Victor's plan was taking shape. The investigator's report confirmed Gianna had 2 sons, and their resemblance to Daniel was uncanny. Victor didn't have proof of paternity, but he didn't need it yet. He started leaking whispers to the board. Nothing concrete, just enough to raise questions about Daniel's focus, about the freelancer's influence. He hired a hacker to poke at Caldwell Quantum systems, planting subtle errors in Gianna's design files, setting the stage for a bigger play. The sparks between Daniel and Gianna were undeniable, but so were the shadows. Victor's schemes, Gianna's secrets, and Daniel's need for control were volatile. The IPO loomed, and with it the risk of everything unraveling. Gianna felt a storm brewing, but she didn't know how close it was to breaking. The Caldwell Quantum Family Picnic was an annual ritual, a carefully curated event to boost morale before the IPO. The sprawling lawn of a Menlo Park estate was dotted with white tents, food trucks, and bounce houses, the air filled with laughter and the clink of glasses. Daniel moved through the crowd, shaking hands with employees and their families, his smile polished, but his mind elsewhere. Gianna's latest designs had landed that morning, and their dinner 2 nights ago, a tense electric affair, had left him restless. She was holding something back, and it gnawed at him. Gianna hadn't planned to attend. The picnic was for employees, not contractors, but Daniel had insisted framing it as a chance to see her designs in action on event banners. She'd brought Aiden and Lucas, her twin sons, knowing they'd love the games and open space. The boys, 6 years old and brimming with energy, darted through the crowd, their dark hair catching the sunlight. Aiden clutched a sketch pad doodling futuristic gadgets, while Lucas led the charge toward a cotton candy machine, his laughter infectious. Daniel spotted Gianna near a tent, her portfolio bag slung over her shoulder, her eyes scanning for her sons. She wore a simple sundress, her hair loose, and the sight of her hit him like it always did, familiar yet new. He approached, his heart thudding. "Glad you made it," he said, his voice warmer than he intended. Gianna nodded, her smile tight. The boys were excited. "Your team did a great job with the setup." She gestured to the banners, her logo bold against the white fabric. Before Daniel could respond, 2 small figures barreled toward them. Mom Lucas called, waving a sticky blue hand. "Can we do the obstacle course?" Aiden trailed behind his sketch pad, tucked under his arm, his eyes curious as they landed on Daniel. Gianna knelt, brushing cotton candy from Lucas's shirt. "Slow down, champ. Ask nicely." She glanced at Daniel, a flicker of unease in her eyes. "This is Aiden and Lucas. Guys, this is Mr. Caldwell, my client." Daniel crouched to their level, his smile genuine. "Hey, you two. Having fun?" But as he looked at them, his breath caught. Their faces' sharp jawlines, bright eyes were like looking in a mirror, a younger version of himself. The resemblance was uncanny, jarring. His mind raced pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known existed, snapping together. "Yeah," Lucas grinned, oblivious to the tension. "The bounce house is fantastic. Want to see my flip?" Aiden, quieter, tilted his head. "Are you the boss of all this?" he asked, his voice soft but direct. Daniel nodded, his throat tight. "Something like that." "You like to draw, Aiden?" He gestured to the sketch pad. Aiden's eyes lit up. "Yeah, I make spaceships and robots." He flipped open the pad, showing a detailed sketch of a quantum processor, its lines eerily similar to Caldwell Quantum's tech. Daniel's heart pounded. "That's impressive." He glanced at Gianna, searching her face for answers, but she was focused on Lucas, her expression guarded. The boys ran off to the obstacle course, and Daniel stood, his voice low. "Gianna, we need to talk." She crossed her arms, her posture defensive. "About what? The designs about them?" He nodded toward the boys. "They look like me." "Why didn't you tell me?" Gianna's eyes flashed, her voice a whisper. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Daniel stepped closer, his intensity flaring. "I see it, Gianna. They're mine, aren't they?" She froze, her breath shallow. "You left Daniel. You don't get to walk back in and make claims." Her words were cold, but her eyes betrayed a storm of fear and anger. "They're my sons. That's all you need to know." Daniel's mind reeled. The math added up 7 years, the timing of that night. But her denial cut deep, fueling a mix of doubt and determination. "I deserve the truth," he said, his voice steady but raw. "If they're mine, I want to know." Gianna turned away, her hands trembling as she adjusted her bag. "I have to check on them." She walked toward the obstacle course, leaving Daniel alone, his world tilting. The rest of the picnic was a blur. Daniel watched the boys from a distance, their laughter echoing their resemblance to him undeniable. Aiden's quiet focus and Lucas's fearless energy were pieces of him, pieces he'd never known existed. But Gianna's wall was impenetrable, her refusal to confirm his suspicions, a knife in his chest. He wanted to believe and trust her denial, but his gut screamed otherwise. Gianna kept her sons close, her heart racing. She hadn't expected Daniel to see them, or the truth to surface so soon. She'd protected Aiden and Lucas for years, shielding them from a father who'd vanished from a world that could hurt them. But Daniel's eyes, the way they'd locked onto the boys, told her the secret was unraveling. She needed to protect them to keep control, but the pull of Daniel's presence was a tide she couldn't fight. Victor Lane was also mingling with board members, his smile sharp as ever. He'd noticed Gianna's arrival with the boys and had seen Daniel's reaction. The investigators' report had hinted at a connection, and now Victor's instincts were confirmed. He didn't approach, didn't need to. The seeds of chaos were already planted. He'd wait, let Daniel's distraction grow, let the IPO's pressure do the rest. Daniel sat in his condo, a bourbon untouched on the table that night. The boys' faces haunted him. Aiden's sketches, Lucas's grin. He pulled up Gianna's portfolio again, not for the designs, but for a clue, anything to confirm what his heart already knew. He didn't want to push her or break the fragile trust they were rebuilding. But the truth was a fire he couldn't extinguish. Gianna, in her Oakland apartment, tucked Aiden and Lucas into bed. Their questions about the picnic. Is Mr. Caldwell friendly? Can we go back? Pierced her. She kissed their foreheads, her resolve hardening. She'd built a life without Daniel, a good life. But his presence, his questions threatened to unravel it. She didn't know how long she could keep the truth buried, or what it would cost to let it out. The picnic had changed everything. Daniel's suspicions were a spark. Gianna's denial, a shield. The innocent and unaware twins were the heart of a storm neither parent could control. Silicon Valley's glittering facade hid a battle brewing that would test them all. The IPO was 10 days away, and Caldwell Quantum's office was a war room. Whiteboards were scrawled with timelines. Engineers hunched over laptops, and Daniel fielded calls from investors demanding assurances. The pressure was relentless, but his mind was split half on the company, half on Gianna and the twins. Aiden and Lucas's faces, so like his own, haunted him. Gianna's denial at the picnic had only deepened his need for answers, but he'd held back, giving her space. It was a fragile truce, and he knew it wouldn't last. Gianna worked from her Oakland apartment, and her designs for Caldwell Quantum are nearly complete. The logo was live across their website pitch decks, and marketing materials, her vision now inseparable from the company's identity. But every email from Daniel, every meeting felt like a tightrope. She'd seen the recognition in his eyes at the picnic, the way he'd looked at her sons. She carried the truth alone, and protecting Aiden and Lucas meant keeping it that way. Yet the pull of Daniel, the spark that refused to die, made her question everything. Victor Lane saw his moment. The investigators' report confirmed that Gianna's sons were likely Daniel's, and the picnic gave him visual proof. He didn't need a DNA test to know he had leverage. With the IPO looming, any crack in Daniel's leadership could sway the board, the investors, maybe even the market. Victor's plan was simple: destabilize Daniel, discredit Gianna, and position himself as the steady hand Caldwell Quantum needed. He leaked a story to a tech blog, anonymous but precise. Caldwell Quantum's CEO, hide secret family, questions swirl before IPO. The story hit like a grenade. It was trending on X by morning, amplified by bots and gossip accounts. Headlines screamed speculation. Daniel Caldwell's mystery kids, IPO in jeopardy. The board called an emergency meeting, and Daniel walked into a room of grim faces. Victor sat at the far end, his expression neutral, but his eyes gleaming. Daniel said, his voice dripping with concern, "This is a distraction we can't afford. Investors are spooked. We need clarity." Daniel's jaw tightened. "It's a rumor, Victor. Nothing more." But his voice betrayed a flicker of doubt. He hadn't confirmed the twins were his, but the blog's photos, grainy shots of Gianna with Aiden and Lucas at the picnic, hit too close. The resemblance was undeniable, and the timing matched that night 7 years ago. He deflected the board's questions, promising to handle it, but the damage was done. Shares in the pre-IPO market dipped, and the press smelled blood. Gianna woke to a flood of notifications. Her inbox was clogged with messages from colleagues, clients, and even strangers. The blog post had named her. Her photo splashed across the internet alongside Daniel's. Freelance designer linked to Caldwell quantum scandal. Her stomach churned. She'd worked years to build her reputation, and now it was unraveling. She called her sitter, ensuring Aiden and Lucas were safe at school, then opened her laptop. The comments on X were brutal accusations of gold-digging questions about her professionalism. She slammed the laptop shut, her hands shaking. Daniel called her an hour later. "Gianna, I saw the post. Are you okay?" "Okay." Her voice was sharp, raw. "My name is everywhere, Daniel. My career, my life, it's being torn apart." "Did you leak this?" "No," he said, his tone fierce. "I'd never do that. I'm trying to figure out who did." She didn't believe him, not entirely. "I didn't sign up for this. I just wanted to do my job." "I know," he said, softer now. "I'm handling it. Stay low, and I'll fix this." But fixing it wasn't simple. The scandal had legs fueled by Victor's careful leaks. He fed more details to the press, nothing provable, just enough to keep the story alive. A second article hinted at Gianna's questionable ties to competitors, planting doubts about her loyalty. Clients started pulling back, and her inbox is now filled with cancellations. Gianna felt the walls closing in her independence, the life she'd built for her sons slipping away. Daniel, meanwhile, was fighting a war on two fronts. The board demanded a public statement, but he refused to address the rumors about the twins without proof. He hired a crisis PR firm, but their advice: distance himself from Gianna, deny everything felt wrong. He couldn't betray her, not again. Instead, he dug into the leak's source, suspecting Victor, but lacking evidence. His team traced the blog post to an anonymous X account, but the trail went cold. Gianna's world was shrinking. She stopped taking calls, focusing on Aiden and Lucas. The boys sensed her stress and their questions. "Why are you sad?" Mom broke her heart. She wanted to confront Daniel to demand answers, but fear held her back. Would he fight for them if she told him the truth about the twins? Or would he pull them into this mess, exposing them to the world's judgment? At Caldwell Quantum, the board meeting grew heated. Victor pushed for transparency, framing it as a fiduciary duty. "If there's a family, Daniel, the investors need to know. Trust is everything." His tone was smooth, but his intent was clear. Undermine Daniel, weaken his grip. Daniel stood, his voice steady, but edged with fury. "This is a personal attack, not a business issue. My focus is the IPO, and I'm delivering. Let's move on." But the board wasn't satisfied. They demanded a plan to stabilize the stock, to quiet the press. Daniel promised results, but his mind was on Gianna. He drove to Oakland that night unannounced and knocked on her door. She opened it, her eyes wary, her arms crossed. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice low to avoid waking the boys. "To fix this," Daniel said. "You don't trust me, but I didn't start this. Please believe that." Gianna's laugh was bitter. Believe you. My life's a headline because of you. Not because of me, he said, stepping closer. Someone's targeting us. It's Victor Lane, a board member. He's done this before, sabotaged me years ago. I won't let him hurt you. Gianna's eyes softened, but her guard stayed up. I can't do this, Daniel. I have too much to lose. He nodded, respecting her boundaries, but hating them. I'll keep you out of it, but I'm not walking away. As he left, Gianna leaned against the door, her heart racing. She wanted to believe him and trust the man she'd felt so connected to years ago. But trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. The scandal was a fire, and she was caught in its flames. Victor, meanwhile, was escalating. He met with his hacker, a shadowy figure who'd already tampered with Gianna's design files. Plant something bigger, Victor instructed. Make it look like she's leaking our tech. The board will eat it up. The scandal was no longer just a rumor, it was a weapon. Daniel and Gianna were on a collision course with the truth, and Victor was pulling the strings, ready to watch them burn. The IPO hung in the balance, but so did something bigger, a family neither fully understood, and a love neither could escape. The scandal's ripples had turned into waves threatening to drown Caldwell Quantum's IPO. Daniel Caldwell's office was a fortress of glass and steel, but inside, he felt like a man under siege. The tech blogs were relentless, each new headline twisting the knife. Caldwell's secret family threatens IPO stability. Investors were pulling back their emails laced with demands for transparency. The board was restless, and Victor Lane's calculated concern during meetings only fueled their doubts. But Daniel's focus wasn't on the stock price or the board, but on Gianna Torres and the twins, Aiden and Lucas. The boys' faces, like his own, haunted him, and Gianna's refusal to confirm they were his had left him in limbo. Gianna, in her Oakland apartment, was fighting her own battle. The scandal had torpedoed her freelance career. Clients, who once praised her designs, now ghosted her, and her inbox was a graveyard of canceled contracts. She kept Aiden and Lucas home from school, shielding them from the media frenzy that had started to spill into real life. Paparazzi had staked out her building, their cameras flashing whenever she stepped outside. She felt trapped, her independence hard-won over 7 years slipping away. Yet Daniel's words from his late-night visit lingered. Someone's targeting us. I think it's Victor Lane. She wanted to believe him, but trust was a risk she couldn't take lightly. Daniel needed answers. The twins' resemblance was too striking to be a coincidence, and the timeline of that night 7 years ago aligned perfectly. He couldn't confront Gianna again, not after her fierce denial at the picnic, but he couldn't ignore his instincts either. Against his better judgment, he hired a private lab to run a discreet DNA test. A contact at the picnic had collected a discarded juice box from Lucas, and Daniel provided his own sample. It was a betrayal of Gianna's trust, and he knew it, but the need for truth outweighed his guilt. The results came back in 48 hours, a 99.9% match. Aiden and Lucas were his sons. The confirmation hit like a thunderbolt. Daniel sat in his condo, the lab report open on his laptop, his bourbon untouched. He was a father. The realization brought a rush of joy, then a flood of rage, not at Gianna, but at himself. He'd left her that morning chasing a fake crisis orchestrated by Victor. He'd abandoned her unaware she was pregnant, and she'd carried the weight of raising their sons alone. But her silence stung. Why hadn't she told him? Why had she let him stand at the picnic, pleading for the truth only to shut him out? When Daniel called, Gianna was in her kitchen sketching distractedly while the boys played in the living room. His voice was tight, controlled. We need to meet. Now. I know about Aiden and Lucas. Her heart stopped. What are you talking about? She said, her voice low to keep the boys from hearing. I did a DNA test, he admitted. They're mine, Gianna. Why didn't you tell me? The air left her lungs. She gripped the counter, her mind racing. He'd gone behind her back, violated her trust. But she couldn't deny the truth anymore. You don't get to do this, she snapped. You don't get to waltz in after 7 years and demand answers. You left. I didn't know. Daniel's voice cracked, raw with guilt. I thought I was saving my company. I didn't know about you, about them. Gianna, I'm sorry. Her eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. Sorry doesn't change the past. I did what I had to do for my sons. They're our sons, he said softer now. I want to be part of their lives. I want to make this right. Gianna hung up her hands, shaking. She couldn't process it, not the betrayal of the DNA test, not Daniel's plea, not the fact that her carefully guarded secret was out. She looked at Aiden and Lucas sprawled on the floor, with their Legos oblivious to the storm. She'd protected them from the world, from him, but now the world was closing in. Daniel drove to Oakland, uninvited, his mind a tangle of anger and remorse. He knocked on Gianna's door, and when she opened it, her expression was a mix of fury and exhaustion. She said, you don't just show up here blocking the doorway. I had to, he said. I needed to see you. I understand why you kept this from me. Gianna stepped outside, closing the door behind her to keep the boys from hearing. You want to know why? Because I didn't trust you. You left a note and vanished. I wasn't going to chase a ghost, Daniel. I had to protect them. I get that, he said, his voice low. But I'm here now. I want to know them. I want to know you. Her laugh was bitter. You don't know me. You see the girl from one night, not the woman who raised 2 kids alone while you built your empire. Then let me know her, he said, stepping closer. I messed up, Gianna. But I'm not walking away again. The tension between them was electric, a mix of anger, guilt, and the same undeniable pull from 7 years ago. Gianna wanted to push him away to protect her heart and her sons, but his sincerity cracked her resolve. She didn't invite him in, but didn't send him away either. I need time, she said finally. This isn't about you. It's about them. Daniel nodded, respecting her boundaries, but hating the distance. I'll wait, but I'm not going anywhere. The scandal wasn't slowing down, sensing blood in the water. Victor Lane fed more leaks to the press, each painting Daniel as reckless and Gianna as an opportunist. The board was fracturing, with some members calling for Daniel to step down temporarily to stabilize the IPO. Victor played the concerned ally, but his endgame was clear: seize control, or at least enough influence to shape Caldwell Quantum's future. Daniel was fighting on all fronts, calming investors, reassuring employees, and grappling with his new reality as a father. He met with the PR firm, rejecting their advice to distance himself from Gianna. Instead, he drafted a statement acknowledging the rumors, but refusing to confirm personal details. My focus is Caldwell Quantum's mission, he said at a press conference, his voice steady. The rest is noise. But the noise was deafening, and the stock continued to wobble. Gianna, meanwhile, was drowning. Her reputation was in tatters, and her son's safety was her only priority. She considered pulling out of the Caldwell Quantum project, but the contract was her lifeline, the payment her buffer against the chaos. She worked late refining the branding, her designs, a defiance of the world trying to tear her down. But every headline, every cruel comment on X chipped away at her strength. Daniel reached out again with a text. I'm sorry about the test. I was wrong. Can we talk? Gianna didn't respond, but she didn't delete the message either. She was angry, but his guilt and persistence stirred something in her. The past was a wound, but the present was a chance maybe to heal it. She didn't know if she could trust him with her sons or her heart. The truth had been unveiled, but it hadn't set anyone free. Daniel and Gianna were bound by their sons, their past, and a love that refused to die. But the scandal was a tidal wave, and Victor was steering it, ready to crash it over them all. The IPO loomed, and with it a reckoning neither could escape. The IPO was a week away, and Caldwell Quantum was teetering on the edge. The scandal about Daniel's secret family had metastasized, with new articles questioning his leadership and Gianna's integrity. Investors were jittery, the board was divided, and the stock's pre-IPO value was in free fall. Daniel was a man possessed, juggling damage control with his need to connect with Gianna and their sons Aiden and Lucas. The DNA test confirmed the truth, but it fractured whatever trust he'd started rebuilding with her. He was determined to make things right, but the world conspired against him. Gianna was in survival mode. Her Oakland apartment felt like a bunker, and her son's laughter kept her grounded. The media frenzy had escalated. Reporters called her the mystery woman and speculated about her motives. Her freelance career was on life support, with even loyal clients hesitating to work with her. She'd poured everything into Caldwell Quantum's branding, but now she wondered if it was a mistake. Daniel's betrayal with the DNA test stung, but his apology, his insistence on being part of their lives, left her conflicted. She wanted to protect Aiden and Lucas, but the pull of Daniel, the man she'd once let in, was harder to resist. Victor Lane was the puppet master, ready to pull his deadliest string. He'd orchestrated the leaks, but they were only the warm-up. His hacker had been working for weeks, slipping into Caldwell Quantum's servers and tampering with Gianna's design files. The changes were subtle, altered color codes, distorted vector paths, but enough to make the branding look amateurish when printed at scale. Victor planned to frame Gianna as incompetent, or worse, a saboteur. If the board believed she was leaking tech or undermining the IPO, they'd force Daniel to cut ties, leaving him vulnerable, and Victor in control. The trap sprang at a critical board meeting. The room was tense, with investors joining via video call, their faces grim. Victor presented a slide deck showcasing the flawed branding logos that pixelated on banners, colors that clashed in print. "This is Ms. Torres's work," he said, his voice heavy with feigned regret. "We trusted her, but these errors suggest either negligence or something more deliberate." Daniel's blood boiled. He knew Gianna's work was flawless. He'd seen the original files. "This isn't her," he said, standing. "Someone's tampered with the designs. I want a full audit of our servers." Victor raised an eyebrow, all innocence. "An audit? With the IPO days away? That's a distraction we can't afford." "Daniel," the board murmured, torn. Some sided with Victor, citing the need for stability. Others backed Daniel, but their faith was wavering. Gianna was called to a follow-up meeting, a quasi-trial, where she'd have to defend herself. She arrived at Caldwell Quantum's office, her portfolio in hand, her jaw set. She'd seen the corrupted files online and knew they weren't hers. Someone was framing her, and Victor's smug presence in the room confirmed her suspicions. Gianna said, "These aren't my designs," her voice steady as she presented her original files. "The vectors have been altered and the color profiles have been swapped. I can prove it." Victor leaned forward, his smile sharp. "Prove it? That's a bold claim, Ms. Torres. Our systems are secure. Are you suggesting a breach? I'm suggesting someone's playing dirty?" She shot back, her eyes locking on his. The room went silent, the tension thick. Daniel stood, his voice cutting through Gianna's right. "I've seen her work, and this isn't it. I'm authorizing a forensic analysis of our servers, effective immediately." He turned to Gianna, his gaze steady. "I trust you." The words hit her harder than she expected. Trust. After the DNA test and scandal, he chose her side. She knotted her throat tight and handed over her original files for comparison. The audit was a race against time. Daniel's team worked through the night, tracing the tampered files to an external IP address. The evidence was damning, a trail leading to Victor's personal server, hidden behind layers of proxies, but not invisible. Daniel confronted him privately, and the evidence was projected on a screen. "You did this," Daniel said, his voice low and dangerous. "You hacked her files, framed her. And I'm starting to think you were behind that call 7 years ago, which pulled me away from her." Victor's mask slipped, but only for a moment. "You're paranoid, Daniel. The pressure's getting to you. I'm just protecting the company. Protecting it." Daniel stepped closer, his fists clenched. "You sold me out once, and you're doing it again. I want you off the board." Victor laughed, cold and sharp. "Is it that easy? The board trusts me. The investors trust me. You're the one with a secret family and a failing IPO." Daniel didn't flinch. "We'll see what they trust when I show them this." He gestured to the evidence. "You're done, Victor." The board convened again, this time with Daniel presenting the audit results. The tampered files, IP trail, and Victor's fingerprints were enough to sway the room. Victor tried to deflect, blaming a rogue contractor, but the board wasn't buying it. They voted to suspend him pending a full investigation. Victor left the room, his smile gone, his eyes promising retaliation. Gianna, cleared of blame, felt a weight lift, but the victory was bittersweet. Her reputation was still battered, and her sons were at risk from the media's gaze. She met Daniel in his office after the meeting, the city lights glittering beyond the glass. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Please stand up for me." "Yes, I did," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I owe you that and more. I know about the call now. Victor set it up to get me out of your life." "I didn't realize, Gianna. I swear." She studied him, searching for a lie, but found only sincerity. "I believe you," she said finally. "But this doesn't fix everything. The boys, they're my world. I can't let you in unless I know you're all in." "I am," he said, stepping closer. "For you, for them. I'll prove it." The trap had been sprung, but Victor wasn't finished. As he left the building, he sent a message to his hacker. One last play. Make it big. The IPO was still in play, and so was the war. Daniel and Gianna had won a battle, but the real fight was beginning, and the truth about their past, their sons, their hearts, was the only weapon they had left. The Caldwell Quantum IPO was 5 days away, and the air in Palo Alto crackled with tension. Daniel Caldwell's office was a command center, screens glowing with real-time stock projections and encrypted server logs. The board's decision to suspend Victor Lane had bought Daniel some breathing room, but the scandal still lingered, a shadow over the company's future. The media frenzy had quieted, but investors remained wary, and the tampered design files had left a dent in confidence. Daniel was fighting to keep the IPO on track, but his heart was split, half on the company, half on Gianna Torres and their sons Aiden and Lucas. The DNA test had confirmed the twins were his, and though Gianna's trust in him was fragile, their shared battle against Victor had forged a tentative alliance. Gianna worked from her Oakland apartment, her laptop a lifeline to her battered career. The board's vindication had cleared her name, but the damage to her reputation lingered. Clients hesitated, and the internet's memory was unforgiving. She focused on her sons, keeping them home to shield them from prying reporters, their laughter, a reminder of what she was fighting for. Daniel's stand against Victor had shifted something in her. He'd risked his company to defend her, and his admission about the fake call 7 years ago, Victor's ploy to pull him away, had softened her anger. But trust was a slow rebuild, and she wasn't ready to let him into her world. Not entirely. Not with Aiden and Lucas at stake. The war was far from over. Victor, though suspended, hadn't vanished. He operated from the shadows, and his network of contacts and hired tech mercenaries were still active. The tampered design files were just the opening salvo. Victor's real plan was to cripple Caldwell Quantum's tech core, its quantum algorithms. He'd hired a hacker, known only as Cypher, to infiltrate the company's servers and plant a subtle bug destabilizing their quantum encryption during the IPO pitch. If the system failed in front of investors, the IPO would collapse and Victor could swoop in as the savior, leveraging his board connections to take control. Daniel suspected Victor wasn't done. The audit that exposed the tampered files had revealed a deeper breach: unauthorized access to their core systems. He assembled a small team of trusted engineers, working around the clock to trace the intrusion. But the hacker was good, their tracks hidden behind encrypted proxies. Daniel needed an edge, something unconventional. That's when he turned to Gianna. Her design skills weren't just artistic. She had a knack for visual pattern recognition, honed from years of blending code and creativity. Daniel called her late, his voice urgent. "Gianna, I need your help. Our servers are compromised, and I think Victor's behind it. Can you look at some data visualizations? You see things differently." Gianna hesitated. She was still raw from the scandal still guarding her heart. But the chance to strike back at Victor to protect her work and her son's future was too compelling. "Send me the files," she said. "But this doesn't mean we're okay." The data arrived: anonymized server logs, access patterns, and error reports. Gianna pored over them in her apartment, her sons asleep down the hall. She translated the raw data into visual maps, and her design software turned numbers into flowing patterns. Hours later, she spotted a recurring anomaly, a faint ripple in the data that looked random, but wasn't. It was a signature, a deliberate mark left by the hacker. She cross-referenced it with her design files, the ones Victor had tampered with, and found a match. The same hand was behind both attacks. She called Daniel at 3 a.m., her voice steady. "I found it. The hacker's using a visual watermark in the code like a tag. It's subtle, but it's there. I can trace it." Daniel was floored. "You're incredible. Can you come to the office? We need to move fast." Gianna arrived at dawn, her laptop under her arm, her resolve ironclad. She and Daniel's team worked in a secure war room, their screens glowing with her visualizations. The watermark led to a specific IP address tied to a shell company Victor had used for years. It wasn't enough to prove his involvement legally, but it was enough to act. Daniel's engineers built a trap, a decoy algorithm that would lure the hacker into revealing their location. Gianna refined the decoy's visual output, embedding her own watermark to mirror the hacker's a digital taunt. The trap worked. Cypher, overconfident, took the bait, accessing the decoy from a server in San Jose. Daniel's team traced it in real time, pinpointing the location. But they needed more than a location. They needed to expose Victor in front of the board, the investors, the world. Daniel and Gianna devised a bold plan: turn the IPO pitch into a public hackathon, a live demonstration of Caldwell Quantum's tech that would also unmask Victor's sabotage. The pitch was set for the next day, a high-stakes event at a San Francisco convention center. Investors, analysts, and press filled the auditorium, their eyes on Daniel as he took the stage. Gianna was backstage, her laptop linked to the company's servers, and her visualizations were ready. Daniel began with the standard pitch: quantum computing's future, Caldwell, quantum's breakthroughs. But then he pivoted. "Today, we're not just showing you our tech," he said, his voice commanding. "We're showing you how we protect it." He signaled Gianna, and her visualizations lit up the massive screen behind him. The audience watched as data flowed, quantum encryption patterns secure and fluid. Then deliberately, Daniel triggered the decoy algorithm. The hacker, watching remotely, couldn't resist. Cypher's intrusion appeared on the screen, and her mirrored watermark marked a red ripple in Gianna's visualizations. The audience gasped as Daniel narrated, "This is a live attack, and we're catching it." Gianna's fingers flew across her keyboard, isolating the intrusion. The team traced it to the San Jose server, and Daniel revealed the shell company's ties to Victor. The evidence was damning logs, IPs, and the tampered design files all linked to Victor's network. The board watching from the front row was stunned. Investors murmured, some applauding the audacity of the move. The press was already typing the story, shifting from scandal to triumph. Victor, watching from a remote feed, realized he'd been outplayed. He sent a frantic message to Cypher, "Shut it down." But it was too late. Daniel and Gianna had turned his trap against him, exposing his sabotage in real time. The hackathon wasn't just a stunt. It was a declaration of war, and they'd won the first battle. Backstage, Gianna exhaled, her hands trembling from adrenaline. Daniel joined her, his eyes bright with gratitude. "You saved us," he said. "You're a genius." She shook her head, a small smile breaking through. "We saved ourselves. But this isn't over." He nodded, the weight of their shared past and uncertain future heavy between them. "I know, but we're in this together now." The Silicon War had shifted. Daniel and Gianna were a team, their skills and histories intertwined. Victor was on the ropes, but he wasn't out. The IPO was still at risk, and the truth about Aiden and Lucas loomed a fragile thread in a battle far from won. The Caldwell Quantum IPO was 3 days away, and the San Francisco Convention Center's hackathon pitch had changed everything. Daniel Caldwell and Gianna Torres had turned Victor Lane's sabotage into a public triumph, exposing his hacker's intrusion in front of investors and the press. The story dominated X and tech blogs. Caldwell Quantum, outsmarts, cyber attack, IPO, gains, momentum. Once divided, the stock stabilized, and the board rallied behind Daniel. But Victor wasn't finished. Suspended but not powerless, he was a cornered animal ready to strike with everything he had. Daniel was riding a high, but it was laced with dread. The hackathon had saved the IPO, but it had also escalated the war with Victor. More pressing was his relationship with Gianna. The truth about Aiden and Lucas, their sons, had bound them, but her trust in him was still fragile. Working together to expose Victor had brought them closer. Their chemistry reignited in the heat of battle. Yet Gianna kept her distance, her priority clear, protecting her boys from the chaos of Silicon Valley's spotlight. Gianna felt the shift too. Her apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a pressure cooker. The media had pivoted, painting her as a hero for her role in the hackathon. But the attention was a double-edged sword. Reporters still camped outside, and her sons' faces were starting to appear in grainy photos online. She'd cleared her name, but her career was still recovering. And the thought of letting Daniel into her life, into Aiden and Lucas's lives, terrified her. Yet his determination, his willingness to fight for her, chipped away at her walls. Victor's final play was desperate and brutal. He knew the board's investigation into his server ties was closing in, and his hacker cipher was now a liability. He needed a knockout blow to derail the IPO and reclaim his influence. He pivoted to a new tactic: fabricated evidence. Using doctored emails and forged server logs, he crafted a narrative that pinned the original hack on Gianna, painting her as a double agent who'd played Daniel and the company. He leaked the evidence to a rival tech firm, which passed it to the press, and by morning, a new headline screamed, "Caldwell Quantum Designer Implicated in IPO Sabotage." The story hit like a missile. Investors, already skittish, pulled back again. The board called an emergency meeting demanding answers. Daniel was livid, his trust in Gianna unshaken, but his control slipping. He met with her at a quiet cafe in Oakland, away from the media's eyes. "This is Victor," he said, sliding his phone across the table, the forged emails open. "He's trying to finish what he started." Gianna's hands trembled as she read. The emails, faked to look like hers, suggested she'd sold Caldwell Quantum's tech to a competitor. "This isn't me," she said, her voice shaking with fury. "You know that." "I do," Daniel said, his eyes steady. "But the board doesn't. We need to fight this together." She nodded, her resolve hardening. "Then let's end it." They devised a plan, one last stand to bury Victor. Daniel's team had been digging into Cypher's server, and they'd found a backdoor, a chat log between Cypher and Victor, unencrypted in their haste. It detailed the hack, the tampered files, and Victor's orders to frame Gianna. The evidence was a gold mine, but presenting it risked exposing Caldwell Quantum's vulnerabilities days before the IPO. Daniel decided to take the gamble, but needed Gianna's help to make it undeniable. The board meeting was a battlefield. Victor, allowed to attend pending his investigation, sat at the far end, his smile smug. The forged emails were projected, and murmurs rippled through the room. Daniel stood, his voice calm but lethal. "These emails are fake," he said, "and we can prove it." Gianna took the floor, her laptop linked to the projector. She displayed the chat logs, visualizations, and turned raw data into a straightforward narrative. She said, "This is the real conversation," pointing to timestamps and IP addresses. "Victor Lane orchestrated the hack, tampered with my designs, and tried to frame me to destabilize the IPO." Victor's composure cracked. "This is a fabrication," he snapped. "You're desperate, Daniel." But the evidence was airtight. The board's tech advisor verified the logs, and Victor's allies, sensing the tide turning, began to distance themselves. One, a venture capitalist who'd backed Victor, stood and admitted he'd received anonymous tips from Victor's network. The betrayal was complete. The board voted unanimously to remove Victor effective immediately and to cooperate with law enforcement on charges of corporate espionage. The room erupted in chaos, but Daniel and Gianna stood together, a united front. As the meeting ended, they stepped onto the stage for a press conference, the world watching. Daniel took the mic, his voice steady. "Caldwell Quantum has faced attacks, but we've emerged stronger. Gianna Torres was falsely accused, and I stand by her. The rumors about my personal life are true. She's the mother of my sons Aiden and Lucas. I'm proud to call them mine, and I'm pleased to call her my partner in this fight." Gianna's breath caught her eyes meeting his. It was the first time he'd publicly claimed the twins, and though she hadn't agreed to it, the weight of his words felt right. She stepped forward, her voice clear. "I was brought into this to design, not to be a pawn. Victor Lane tried to ruin me, but he failed. Caldwell Quantum's future is bright, and I'm honored to be part of it." The crowd applauded, the narrative flipping. The press, sensing a redemption story, ate it up. The stock surged, and the IPO was back on track. Victor, escorted from the building, sent a final message to Cypher: burn it all. But Cypher, sensing the end, had vanished, leaving Victor alone. Backstage, Daniel and Gianna faced each other, the adrenaline fading. She said, "You didn't have to say that," her voice soft, about the boys. "I meant it," he said. "I want to be their father, Gianna. I want to be with you." She didn't respond, but her hand brushed his, a small gesture that said more than words. The breaking point had come, and they'd survived it together. The IPO was secure. Victor was out, and the truth was out. But the war had left scars, and the future of their family, their love, was still unwritten. The Caldwell Quantum IPO was a triumph, a glittering moment in Silicon Valley's relentless churn. The San Francisco Convention Center buzzed with investors, analysts, and press, their applause echoing as Daniel Caldwell rang the bell to mark the company's public debut. The stock soared, defying the scandal's shadow, propelled by the dramatic hackathon that had exposed Victor Lane's sabotage. Daniel stood on the stage, his suit crisp, his smile practiced, but his heart was elsewhere on Gianna Torres and their sons Aiden and Lucas. His public acknowledgement of them during the board meeting had shifted their world, and though the IPO was secure, his future with them was not. Gianna watched from the sidelines, her role as the branding designer, now a footnote in the company's narrative. The media had pivoted, dubbing her the hero designer who'd helped save the IPO, but the spotlight was a burden. She'd stood beside Daniel at the press conference, her voice steady as she defended her work and her sons, but the weight of his words, "I'm proud to call them mine," lingered. She hadn't agreed to let him into their lives, not fully, but his sincerity, his fight for her had cracked her defenses. Aiden and Lucas were safe at home with their sitter, oblivious to the storm, but Gianna knew their world was about to change. The days after the IPO were a whirlwind. Daniel was everywhere. Interviews, investor dinners, and board meetings to solidify Caldwell Quantum's new era. But every free moment, his thoughts turned to Gianna. He'd meant every word on that stage, but words weren't enough. He'd left her 7 years ago, unaware of her pregnancy, and she'd built a life without him. As a father, he wanted to earn his place in it. He texted her after the bell ceremony. "Can we talk just us?" For them. Gianna read the message in her Oakland apartment, the boys' laughter filling the background as they built a Lego spaceship. She wanted to say no to protect the life she'd carved out, but Daniel's actions defending her, exposing Victor, claiming their sons, demanded a response. She typed back, "Tomorrow." Neutral ground. The park by the bay. They met at Crissy Field, the Golden Gate Bridge, looming in the distance, the bay sparkling under a September sun. Gianna arrived with Aiden and Lucas, their energy boundless as they raced toward the grass. Daniel watched them, his heart swelling at their joy, their faces like his own. Gianna stood beside him, her arms crossed, her expression guarded but softer than before. "You did it," she said, nodding toward the city, the IPO. "You won. We won." He corrected, his voice low. "You saved us, Gianna. Your designs, your visuals, they turned the tide." She shrugged, a small smile breaking through. "I was doing my job." "It was more than that," he said, turning to face her. "I know I messed up. 7 years ago I left. I didn't know about them, but that's no excuse. I want to make it right for you, Aiden and Lucas." Gianna's eyes flicked to the boys chasing each other across the field. "They're my world, Daniel. I've kept them safe, given them everything I could. Letting you in, it's a risk." "I know," he said, stepping closer, "but I'm all in. I love you, Gianna. I never stopped, and I want to be their father, not just in name." Her breath caught. Love. The word hung between them, heavy with history. She'd felt it that night 7 years ago, a spark that had burned despite his absence. But love wasn't enough, not without trust, not without time. "I need to see it," she said finally, "not just hear it. They deserve a father who's there, not one who's chasing the next big deal." Daniel nodded, his jaw tight. "I'll prove it, whatever it takes." The conversation shifted to the boys. Daniel asked about their lives, Lucas's love for building, Aiden's knack for sketching tech-inspired art. Gianna shared stories, her voice softening, as she described their quirks, their dreams. For the first time, they talked not as adversaries or allies, but as parents. When Aiden ran over waving a drawing of a quantum-powered robot, Daniel knelt, his eyes bright. "This is awesome, buddy. Have you ever thought about coding it? Aiden's shy smile was a mirror of Daniel's. Maybe. Mom says I'm good at games. Gianna watched her heart twisting. She saw the connection, the potential for something real. But she wasn't ready to leap. One step at a time, she told Daniel as they parted, the boys tugging her toward an ice cream cart. The weeks that followed were a delicate dance. Daniel visited Oakland, starting small park playdates and pizza nights. He brought Aiden a coding book and Lucas a model rocket kit. Gianna watched him closely, searching for cracks. But he was patient, present, learning the boys' rhythms. The media frenzy faded, replaced by stories of the Silicon Valley family that had triumphed over scandal. Gianna hated the label, but it brought new clients, and her career was slowly rebuilding. Daniel, meanwhile, was rethinking his life. The IPO's success had cemented his legacy, but it felt hollow without Gianna and the boys. He started delegating at Caldwell Quantum, stepping back from the daily grind. The board, now loyal after Victor's ousting, supported his shift. He wanted time to be a father, and win Gianna's heart. He proposed a weekend trip to Santa Cruz, just the four of them. Gianna hesitated, then agreed a tentative yes to a future she couldn't yet see. The trip was a turning point. On the beach, Daniel built sandcastles with Lucas, laughing as the waves crashed over their work. Aiden sketched the boardwalk, and Daniel offered pointers on perspective. Gianna watched from a blanket, her guard lowering with every smile. That night, as the boys slept in their hotel room, Daniel and Gianna sat on the balcony, the ocean a soft roar below. He said, "I'm not the man I was," his voice raw. "I built an empire, but I lost you. I won't make that mistake again." Gianna looked at him, her eyes searching. "I want to believe you, but it's not just about us. It's about them." "I know," he said, taking her hand. "I'm here for all of you, for good." She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. It wasn't a promise, but it was a start. The resolution wasn't perfect. Trust was a slow build, and the scars of the past lingered. But the IPO's success, Victor's defeat, and the public's embrace of their story had cleared a path. Daniel and Gianna were no longer just CEOs and designers. They were a family, fragile, but forming, ready to face whatever came next. The Silicon Valley sun was setting, casting a golden glow over Half Moon Bay. Gianna Torres stood on the porch of her new studio, a converted cottage nestled among coastal oaks. The space was hers, a dream realized after years of hustle, funded by the Caldwell Quantum contract, and a surge of new clients drawn to her hero designer story. Inside, Aiden and Lucas sprawled on a rug, their laughter mingling with the sound of waves. The boys were thriving, their lives blending Oakland's grit and the coast's calm. Gianna's heart was whole, but it carried a new weight. Daniel Caldwell. Their father was no longer a ghost. Daniel stepped down as Caldwell Quantum's CEO a month after the IPO. The decision shocked the board, the press, the valley itself, but he was resolute. The company was stable, its quantum tech revolutionizing industries. But Daniel's priorities had shifted. He wanted to be a father, a partner, a man who showed up. He took an advisory role, working remotely from a rented house in Half Moon Bay, a short walk from Gianna's studio. The move was a gamble, but he'd bet everything on building a life with her and their sons. Their relationship was a work in progress. Gianna had given him a chance, but trust was a slow burn. They spent weekends together, hikes with the boys, dinners, where Lucas told wild stories, and Aiden shared his latest coding project. Daniel was patient, learning the small things, Lucas's obsession with rockets, Aiden's quiet need for routine. Gianna watched him, her skepticism softening with every moment he showed up. He wasn't perfect. He was still intense, still wired to control, but he was trying, and that mattered. The boys were adjusting. Aiden, the thinker, asked questions about Daniel's work, his eyes lighting up when Daniel explained quantum computing in simple terms. Lucas, the firecracker, challenged Daniel to races on the beach, crowing when he won. Gianna set boundaries: no media, no public stunts. But she let Daniel into their world step by careful step. After the IPO's drama, the Valley buzzed with their story. The Silicon Valley family, a feel-good narrative. Gianna rolled her eyes at the hype, but it brought clients, and her studio was thriving. Her designs now sought after from San Francisco to New York. Daniel's new life was quieter, but not without challenges. Stepping back from Caldwell Quantum meant navigating a board eager to fill his shoes. He'd handpicked a successor, a brilliant engineer who shared his vision, but the transition wasn't seamless. Investors still called him, and the press hounded him for quotes. He deflected, focusing on his family. He and Gianna were building something real: late-night talks on her porch, shared glances when the boys laughed. It wasn't love declared, but love lived a slow dance toward a future neither had expected. One evening, as the boys slept and Gianna sketched in her studio, Daniel brought her coffee, a ritual they'd started. "You're happy here," he said, gesturing to the space canvases on the walls, a desk cluttered with design tools. "I am," she said, setting her pencil down. "This is what I always wanted a place for me, for them." "And me?" he asked, his voice soft but direct. She met his gaze, her heart steady. "You're getting there." He smiled, a rare, unguarded moment. "I'll take that." Their peace was hard-won, a fragile new beginning after years of secrets and scandals. Victor Lane was gone, facing charges of corporate espionage. His influence shattered. The Valley had moved on to its next obsession, leaving Daniel and Gianna to build in quiet. They took the boys to the aquarium, coding camps, and art classes, and their lives were weaving together. Gianna's studio became a hub for local artists, her work blending tech and soul in ways that echoed her journey. Daniel, no longer the Valley's golden boy, found freedom in the margins, and his ambition was now tied to family, not empire. But Silicon Valley never slept, and neither did its shadows. Late one night, Daniel checked his email, which was a habit he couldn't shake. Amid the usual noise board updates, investor queries, was a message from an anonymous sender. The subject line blank. He opened it, his pulse quickening. The text was short, chilling. "Victor was just a pawn. The real game is only beginning." Daniel stared at the screen, the words a cold echo of the Valley's ruthless pulse. He didn't know who sent it, didn't know what it meant, but he felt the weight of a new threat. Victor had been a manipulator, but he'd had allies, connections in the shadows of tech's elite. Someone else was watching, waiting. Daniel glanced at Gianna's studio, the light spilling from her window, and made a choice. He wouldn't tell her, not yet. She'd fought enough, carried enough. This was his burden, at least for now. He deleted the email, but its words lingered, a warning that their new beginning was fragile. The Valley was a place of dreams and betrayals, and though Daniel and Gianna had found their footing, the game was far from over. They had each other, their sons, their hard-won peace, but the shadows were stirring, and the next move was anyone's guess.